A little girl quietly cleaned the courtroom floor, but when the judge discovered the heartbreaking reason why he couldn't hold back his tears, this story will stay with you forever. The cold marble floor of the Chicago courthouse stretched endlessly before 6-year-old Clara, her small knees burning red against the unforgiving stone. Her tiny hands gripped a tattered rag soaked with murky water that left streaks behind with each desperate scrub. The courthouse had emptied hours ago, leaving only the echo of her labored breathing and the soft splash of dirty water in her bucket. Her oversized sweater, patched at the elbows and hanging like a tent around her frail frame, offered little protection against the building's nighttime chill. Her worn slippers barely clung to her feet, the soles so thin she could feel every groove in the marble beneath her. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made her small figure appear even more fragile against the vast expanse of the courtroom. Clara's movements were mechanical, born of desperate necessity rather than any sense of purpose. Each stroke of the rag was a prayer whispered to an indifferent universe. Please let this be enough. Please don't make me sleep outside again. Please don't let her say I'm not trying hard enough. A door slammed with thunderous finality, the sound reverberating through the empty halls like a gunshot. Clara's hands froze mid-scrub, her heart hammering against her ribs as heavy footsteps approached. She knew that sound, the confident stride of authority, the measured pace of someone who belonged. In this place of justice and judgment. "What are you doing here?" The voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and demanding. Judge William Harrison stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the hallway light. He had returned for forgotten case files, expecting to find the courthouse empty and secure. Instead, he discovered this child, this impossibly small child, laboring like a servant in his courtroom. His dark eyes accustomed to seeing the worst of humanity parade before his bench widened in disbelief at the scene before him. Clara stood slowly, her legs trembling from hours of kneeling, still clutching the filthy rag like a lifeline. Water dripped from her hands onto the partially cleaned floor, each drop echoing in the oppressive silence. "I'm working," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of someone far older than her 6 years. Judge Harrison's face darkened, his judicial composure cracking. "Working, you're a child. Children don't work. They play, they learn, they sleep in beds with clean sheets." His voice rose with each word, not in anger at her, but at the incomprehensible situation before him. Clara flinched at his tone, but held her ground, her small chin lifting with a defiance born of survival. "My Aunt Margaret says if I work hard enough, she won't throw me out again," she said, the words tumbling out with the practiced cadence of a lesson, learned through repetition and fear. The judge felt his blood run cold. He stepped closer, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the marble Clara had been scrubbing. "Throw you out again." His voice had dropped to barely controlled fury. Clara nodded, her dark eyes reflecting a weariness that no child should ever know. "Last week she made me sleep outside by the dumpsters behind the building. She said I eat like a rat, but clean like a slug, and rats who can't clean don't deserve roofs over their heads." The courthouse seemed to shrink around Judge Harrison as the full horror of the situation crashed over him. He had presided over countless cases of child neglect and abuse, had seen the statistics and heard the testimonies, but never had the reality been so starkly, heartbreakingly present before him. "Who is your aunt?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Margaret Collins. She cleans here at night. I stay in the storage room behind the janitor's closet, but only if I scrub all the floors, organize her cleaning cart, and don't make any noise or complain about being hungry or cold." Judge Harrison's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Margaret Collins. He knew her, had seen her emptying trash cans and mopping floors for years. A severe woman with sharp features and sharper words who had always struck him as unnecessarily harsh, but he had never imagined this. "Where are your parents, Clara?" The question came out gentler than he intended, though he braced himself for an answer he suspected would break his heart further. Clara's small shoulders sagged, and for a moment she looked even younger than her 6 years. "My mom left when I was 4. Aunt Margaret says I was a mistake, that Mom got tired of her mistake following her around, and now I'm Aunt Margaret's mistake to deal with. She says no one wants mistakes like me. The words hit Judge Harrison like physical blows. He had spent 30 years on the bench, had heard every conceivable cruelty that humans could inflict upon one another. But this child's matter-of-fact recitation of her own devaluation shattered something fundamental inside him. Clara stood there, still gripping that filthy rag, her shoulders tense as if waiting for him to confirm her aunt's assessment, to tell her she was indeed unwanted, unworthy a burden. Instead, he knelt down until he was at her eye level, his expensive suit jacket touching the wet floor she had been cleaning. Clara, listened to me very carefully. You don't deserve this. No child deserves this. But Clara shook her head, the movement quick and practiced. Aunt Margaret says I do. She says I'm ugly and slow and stupid, and I'm only useful for scrubbing filth because that's what I am, filth. She says pretty girls get families and ugly girls get mops. Judge Harrison closed his eyes, fighting back tears of rage and heartbreak. When he opened them, his voice was steady and firm. Clara, I want you to go wait outside my office, right now. Do you know where that is? Clara's eyes widened with fear. But I haven't finished the hallway yet. If I don't finish everything on her list, she'll make me sleep outside again, and it's supposed to rain tonight. She checks everything with her flashlight, and if she finds even one dirty spot, she says it proves I'm as worthless as my mother said I was. You won't see your aunt again tonight, Judge Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of his office. That's a promise from me to you. Clara stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception or cruelty. Finding none, she set down the rag with trembling hands and walked toward his office, her worn slippers making barely a sound on the marble floor. Every few steps she glanced back, as if expecting him to change his mind, to tell her to return to her scrubbing, to confirm that she was indeed as worthless as she had been taught to believe. That night, Judge Harrison made phone calls that would change everything. First to Child Protective Services, then to the court administrator, then to his own housekeeper to prepare a room. By morning, Clara sat at his breakfast table in his suburban Chicago home, staring in complete disbelief at a plate of warm scrambled eggs, buttered toast, and fresh orange juice. The plate sat untouched before her as she studied it with the intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Is this just for me? She asked, her voice cracking with emotion. All of it? Judge Harrison, who had been watching her from across the table with a mixture of heartbreak and determination, nodded. Yes, Clara, all for you. Her eyes filled with tears that she quickly wiped away with the back of her hand. Aunt Margaret says food is for people who aren't burdens. She says burdens get scraps when the real people are finished eating. Clara, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you are not a burden. You are a little girl who deserves to eat warm food at a proper table, who deserves to sleep in a clean bed, who deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. Over the following days, as Clara slowly began to trust that the food would keep coming and the warm bed would remain available, the full scope of her suffering emerged. She told him in the matter-of-fact way that children recounted their experiences about being locked in the janitor's closet for hours when she made too much noise about the time her aunt shoved her head into a mop bucket full of dirty water because she had spilled cleaning solution, about the endless litany of cruel words designed to convince her that she was fundamentally unworthy of love or care. What broke Judge Harrison's heart most was not the anger or fear he expected to see in Clara's recounting, but the resignation, the way she accepted these cruelties as natural consequences of her own inadequacy rather than the criminal abuse they represented. She had been so thoroughly convinced of her own worthlessness that she approached each day expecting punishment, expecting to be told she had failed to earn her right to exist. One evening, a week after Clara had come to stay with him, Judge Harrison found her curled up on the hardwood floor beside the bed he had prepared for her, using her sweater as a pillow. Clara, sweetheart, you can sleep in the bed, he said gently, kneeling beside her small form. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. I was scared I might mess up the clean sheets. Aunt Margaret always said dirty kids don't get to touch nice things, and I didn't want you to get mad and send me back. The simple statement nearly brought him to his knees. He lifted her carefully onto the bed, tucked the clean sheets around her small body, and sat beside her until her breathing evened out in sleep. But even in sleep she curled into a tight ball, as if protecting herself from blows that might come in her dreams. The legal battle that followed tested every principle Judge Harrison held dear about justice and fairness. When Margaret Collins filed a complaint against him, claiming he had kidnapped her niece, a court-appointed inspector arrived to investigate. Clara clung to Judge Harrison's side throughout the interview, her small hand gripping his jacket with desperate strength. "I don't want to go back," she whispered to the inspector, her voice barely audible. "She tells me I have cockroach blood, and that's why no one will ever love me. She says I smell like garbage, and that's why my mom left." Judge Harrison felt his heart shatter anew with each revelation. "You are loved, Clara," he told her, his own voice breaking, "and I will never let anyone hurt you again." During the formal interview, Clara told the inspector about her new life with quiet amazement. "I like it here. He reads me stories before. Bed and the stories have happy endings. He never yells even when I accidentally break something. He lets me laugh, and when I laugh he smiles instead of telling me to shut up because I sound like a dying animal." "Do you want to stay with Judge Harrison?" the inspector asked. Clara's answer came without hesitation, her voice stronger than anyone had ever heard it. "Yes, because here I get to be a real girl. Not trash, not a rat, not a mistake, just Clara." But just as Clara began to bloom under the warmth of genuine care and affection, another challenge emerged that would test the fragile foundation of her new life. Her biological mother, Sarah, recently released from a rehabilitation facility and, claiming to be clean and sober, filed a petition for custody of her daughter. The news hit Clara like a physical blow. The night before she was scheduled to meet her mother at a downtown Chicago park, she found Judge Harrison in his study and climbed onto his lap with the unconscious trust of a child who had finally found safety. "If she takes me back, do I have to go?" Clara asked, her voice small and scared. Judge Harrison wrapped his arms around her, feeling the weight of her question and the magnitude of what hung in the balance. "Not if it's not what's best for you, sweetheart. The court will decide what's best and your voice will be heard." The meeting between Clara and her mother was arranged for a sunny Saturday afternoon in Millennium Park with a social worker present to observe. Sarah Martinez had cleaned up well. Her hair was neat, her clothes were clean, and her eyes were clear for the first time in years. But Clara, now 7 years old and having spent months learning to trust her own worth, approached the reunion with a wariness that spoke to deep wounds still healing. "Clara, baby, I'm so sorry," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face as she reached for her daughter. "Mommy was sick, but I'm better now. I want to take care of you again." But Clara stepped back, staying close to Judge Harrison's side. Her voice, when she spoke, carried a strength that surprised everyone present. "You forgot about me," she said simply. "You left me with someone who told me every day that I didn't deserve to be alive, that I was ugly and stupid and worthless. You left me there for 2 years. Sarah's face crumpled. "I was sick, Clara. I had a disease that made me do terrible things, but I'm better now. I love you." "You still left," Clara replied, and though her voice was quiet, it carried the weight. Of absolute truth. The process of rebuilding that relationship would take time, months of supervised visits, family therapy sessions, and careful negotiations between a mother trying to earn forgiveness and a child learning to trust again. Clara's progress was remarkable. Under Judge Harrison's patient care, she had blossomed from a frightened, self-loathing child into a bright, articulate little girl who was beginning to believe in her own worth. Have you ever experienced or known someone who has experienced the kind of neglect and emotional abuse that Clara endured? Share your thoughts in the comments below. During one particularly challenging therapy session, Clara expressed her confusion about having 2 adults who claimed to love her. "I don't understand," she told the therapist, while Judge Harrison and Sarah listened. "How can someone love you and still hurt you? How can someone love you and still leave you?" It was Judge Harrison who answered, his voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes, Clara, people love imperfectly. Sometimes they love as much as they're able to, but they're not able to love in the way that keeps you safe and happy. That doesn't mean the love isn't real, but it also doesn't mean you have to accept love that hurts you." Over time, Clara made the decision that would shape her future. She chose to remain with Judge Harrison as her legal guardian, while slowly, carefully rebuilding a relationship with her mother. Sarah would be part of her life, phone calls, weekend visits, birthday cards. But Clara's home would remain with the man who had found her scrubbing floors and seen not a burden to be managed, but a child to be cherished. One evening, nearly a year after that fateful night in the courthouse, Clara curled up next to Judge Harrison on the couch after finishing her bedtime story. The house was warm and quiet, filled with the comfortable sounds of a life built on love and security. "Do you think I'm still trash inside?" she asked, the question emerging from some deep place where old fears still lived. Judge Harrison set down his reading glasses and pulled her closer, feeling the solid warmth of this child who had become his daughter in every way that mattered. "No, my love," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your light, your hope, your joy. You're the reason I learned how to be a father." Clara pressed her head against his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had become the soundtrack of her security. "Then I'll try to believe it too," she whispered. And she did. Day by day, moment by moment, Clara chose to believe in her own worth, to trust in the love that surrounded her, to hope for a future that stretched beyond the cruel limitations others had tried to place on her. The final court hearing took place on a crisp autumn morning in Chicago. Clara, now 8 years old and radiant with health and happiness, wore a blue dress that Judge Harrison had let her pick out herself. When the judge, a colleague of Harrison's, who had recused himself from the case, asked Clara if she wished to be legally adopted by William Harrison, her answer came without hesitation. "He found me on a dirty floor in this courthouse," she said, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. "But he never looked at me like I was dirty. He looked at me like I mattered. He taught me that I was worth saving, worth loving, worth fighting for. I want to be his daughter forever." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom as Judge Harrison knelt down to embrace his new daughter, both of them crying tears of joy and relief and overwhelming love. The gavel fell with finality, and Clara Harrison walked out of that courthouse, hand in hand with her father, no longer the frightened child scrubbing floors in the darkness, but a beloved daughter walking into the light. Later that evening, as Clara organized her own room, not because she had to earn her place, but because she took pride in her space, she looked up at Judge Harrison with a smile that could have lit up the entire city. "Now I clean my own room," she said with satisfaction, "but only because I want to, not because I have to be good enough to stay." Judge Harrison knelt down and looked into the eyes of his daughter, this miraculous child who had taught him that love could indeed heal the deepest wounds, that hope could flourish in the darkest places, and that sometimes the most broken things, when handled with care, become the most beautiful. "You never had to earn your place, Clara," he whispered back. "You were always enough. You were always worthy of love. You were always my daughter, even before the papers made it official." And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of home and the security of unconditional love, Clara Harrison knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, not because she had worked hard enough to deserve it, but because she was loved for exactly who she was. The little girl who had once scrubbed courthouse floors in desperate hope of earning her right to exist had discovered something far more valuable than acceptance. She had found a father who saw her worth not in what she could do, but in who she was. And in learning to see herself through his eyes, she had found the courage to believe in her own immeasurable value. Some stories end with grand gestures and dramatic revelations. Clara's story ended with something far more powerful, the quiet, revolutionary act of a child learning to love herself, supported by a father who had chosen to see light, where others saw only shadows, hope, where others saw only despair, and a daughter where others saw only a burden. In courtrooms across America, judges make decisions that affect thousands of lives, but sometimes the most important decision is not made from the bench, but in the moment when someone chooses to see a child's worth and fight for their right to be loved. Clara's story reminds us that heroes come in many forms, that families are built not just through blood, but through choice, and that no child, no matter how broken they may seem, is ever beyond the reach of transformative love. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.